Michael. Welcome to episode 4 of the Workplace Violence Mitigation Podcast. I am your host, Lieutenant Dan. I am here today with Michael Ruggiero from Bo Gittle and Associates out of New York. And I'm going to let Mike give you some of his background, but we're going to be talking today about there was a recent active shooter event in the city of New York. And Mike's got some insight on that, as well as some insight regarding um, the trends in training for security and law enforcement as a whole, and some of the things that private sector is now employing in response to some of these recent active shooter events. So, Mike, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and your history?
So I started my career in the early 90s in New York State Department of Corrections. I worked in a very famous prison known as Sing Sing. I worked in B Block in Sing Sing, which was the wild, wild west back in the days. A lot of transient inmates there, a lot of violence. I was lucky enough to become an investigator on New York State Corrections fugitive unit. It was called the Escape Absconding Unit, where we recaptured inmates wanted on correctional warrants by the state of New York. I was actually in the street. A lot of people don't think correctional officers are in the street, but I was. I was on the streets first on a Bronx team, then a Manhattan team. Few years later, 5 years or so, went over to NYPD where I was a uniform cop. I was actually on the riot unit for 2 years. Then I went to the Detective Bureau where I became a detective investigator in the warrant squad. Eventually went into a fugitive unit on the warrant squad, which is a related type of duty that, that warrants squads normally do. I was on a unit called the Violent Felony Squad. We worked with the U.S. Marshals, did the top 10 most wanted in New York City. Got promoted, went to Brownsville, Brooklyn, 7-3 Precinct, which is a very well-known violent area of New York City, probably the pound for pound most violent precinct in the city still. I was an anti-crime sergeant there, which basically means that I was plain clothes in the gun squad. Basic duties were to get guns off the street. Was promoted to detective sergeant, went to Brooklyn South, where I was acting squad commander in the 6-2 detective squad, and then the commander of the 6-6 detective squad. I retired 18 years ago from NYPD and took a year off and started working for the feds as a contractor, first for 2 intelligence agencies as a background investigator, then the now defunct USAID as part of the counterintelligence team in that background investigations team for the IG. Then the Bureau in 14, also as a background investigator. In 2016, I went on an interview, my first job in private industry. I was the chief investigator for a company called Bo Gittle and Associates. And 9 years later now, I'm the president and chief operating officer. We're a mid-sized security, boutique security company in Manhattan. We also do about 1,000 investigations a year, which gives us purview into the other side, what happens when things go wrong, which helps our security business as well. And that's essentially my background.
Very nice. Sounds like a very so how long were you in law enforcement overall, Mike?
So between NYPD, corrections, and as a civilian in law enforcement, over 25 years, it's about 27 years.
Very nice. Well, thank you for your service. I can relate to the pain that goes along with that. Um, so now you're in the private sector, and obviously we're seeing a tremendous increase in these violent events, and we are the WVM, which is the Workplace Violence Mitigation Institute. We focus here a lot more on training the civilian population. So it's not so much training the security agents nor law enforcement, but getting people to recognize these things quickly so they can take some action on their own part. I'm curious from your perspective and what you're doing now, how you're seeing things change in the training component and how you're seeing things change in the private sector and corporate America with regard to how they are approaching these incidents and what they're doing to prepare themselves a little bit more for them.
So, as you know, we had a major active shooter event here about 2 months ago, 345 Park Avenue. Individual had driven essentially cross country to seek out somebody in the NFL. He believed that, as we know, that he claimed that he had some sort of brain damage from playing football and had a grudge with the NFL, even though he never played in the NFL. Got into the building with an AR-15, shot a cop, shot numerous other people, killing three people altogether. So since that incident, we've seen a kind of paradigm shift here, is where these incidents would happen, and they've happened numerous times in the city. Um, from those incidents, people would, and as they happened, as the assassination of the CEO of United Healthcare, it dies down. People don't get worried. Now that these have been occurring on a regular basis, companies have taken it into their own hands to prepare their workforce in the event of some sort of active shooter situation.
Yeah, and we've been teaching for a number of years. And I don't want to call it a decline. It's just the resources of law enforcement is continuously being stretched. And their abilities to do the things that they once did, and the abilities to do the investigative work and the follow up, and even the manpower to respond to something like this, if it's just not the same any longer. And if companies don't take some kind of initiative on their own to at least mitigate, or uh, I hate to use the word prevent because you can't prevent these things, but to mitigate the impact if they actually occur, this is when we get the major fatalities. I'm curious though, with the experience that you've got, and I can put my own 2 cents in here. The faults of law enforcement as they respond to these things, they seem to, although they're improving, the big issues seem to be still in existence. One of them being communication and lack of consistency and conformity with regard to the training, even between agencies. Are you seeing any improvement with regard to that kind of thing for the law enforcement that's still on the street today?
So, as you know, NYPD is probably the largest police department in the world. We have about 35,000 cops now. When I was on the job, it was closer to 40,000. So there's literally a cop on every block here. The amount of cops that are specialized trained or have specialty in active shooter response training is actually very small. So although you might have cops on the street and a large amount of cops that can respond, that are they prepared? Now we know that a cop was killed in that 345 active shooter situation. He was working off-duty detail in uniform, and he became very good friends with the chief of Manhattan South, Jimmy McCarthy, and he told us that unfortunately the cop didn't even get his gun out of the holster. So are they prepared? Are the regular rank and file cops prepared to deal with these active shooters? I don't believe that they are at this point. NYPD has a large contingent of specialized units, which emergency services and this SRG, which used to be the riot unit I was in years ago. They carry heavy weapons, and they're more kind of prepared to respond. But the rank and file cops are not prepared to respond. And on top of that, there's so many law enforcement agencies active in New York City at any given time. I remember when I was given training, I went through the New York State Police Academy Investigative School as a correction investigator. They said at any given time, there's 50 to 100 law enforcement agencies within the city of New York actually taking enforcement. So how many of these units are really prepared to deal with active shooters? Probably very small amount. And to your point, it's very disjointed. So there's no common training throughout common thread throughout law enforcement that's prepared these officers to respond to these very violent situations.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, one of the things that we've noticed, nationwide, like I said, I have some partners here that I work with that are, they operate a security academy. So they're training, and they're former law enforcement guys. So they're training the new security agents up to the standards where law enforcement is, was, and should be. Um, so that if law enforcement responds to a situation where you have security already present in the building, those two entities can come together on a common goal and achieve that goal. Are you seeing any of that out your way where the security and the police are actually starting to? Because let's face it, there's always been this where the law enforcement look at the security guys like, yeah, yeah, you're a different entity, but you're on a different level than we are. Are you seeing that even out at all?
So because of the really strict gun laws in New York, the ability to carry a gun for security is mostly within the purview of retired and active law enforcement here. So all of our armed security personnel in this company are retired and active law enforcement. So they have a good working relationship. If they have a cop that's, they're in a building, we're in a building right now on 57th Street. I don't want to say the name of it. We have an armed security agent in the lobby. He's a retired NYPD member of service. He knows the cops in the area and has a good relationship with them in that sense. That being said, no, I don't think there's any real effort for these law enforcement agencies, even NYPD, to work with private security on a controlled or combined response to these situations. And that's a very good point. There should be some outreach by these departments to work with civilian security, whether they're armed or not armed, to respond to these active shooters.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, armed or it's actually it's an interesting dynamic where most of your armed security personnel out there are former law enforcement that can actually be very beneficial. But at the same token, and we've seen it here too, the training for security guards, as opposed to what we're referring to now as private policing agents, was certainly lacking. The state's requirements were in Illinois were horseshit. So really, you could take somebody who didn't graduate high school, throw on a black T-shirt that says security on it, and he's off and running. And with that lack of training comes the ability to do some really stupid things when things go sideways and they end up getting themselves hurt. And sometimes they get themselves hurt by the law enforcement that's responding because they just don't understand how this game works. So trying to on a national level get those two entities to come together a little bit would be a great idea. But while we are trying to um, force the hand of both of these entities to come together, what suggestions can you give to the upper management of these private entities as far as what steps can they take internally to mitigate their exposure to this?
That's a great question. And this is something that we're actively working on as a company. We are now seeing private companies that are within buildings, within the floor space of a large building, saying we no longer believe that the security in the lobby, whether it's armed or unarmed, and mostly it's unarmed. In some buildings, we do have our armed guards as well, uh, manning the lobby. They're saying, hey, Mike, could you come into our building? We have 3 floors here. We're a large financial firm, an M&A firm, a private equity firm. We now have a sovereign wealth fund. I can't mention the name of it, that we just completed uh, multiple security assessments for, which is where we have a certified protection professional who works for us. He goes out to the building, out to the floor, and makes a determination of the best way to mitigate risk. And then after he mitigates the risk, he gives classes on active shooting. What's the best way to escape if there's a situation with an emergency on your floor? Who do you deal with? Does the company need to take measures themselves? We've had several companies talk about putting bulletproof or bullet resistance, not bulletproof, coating on their windows to try to mitigate, potential active shooter situation. So this is a new trend where we're now seeing the companies in these buildings proactively say, let's get a security assessment. Let's get a professional here. Tell us how we could either prevent or if an active shooter situation occurs, escape, the situation, run, hide, fight. But it goes much deeper than that. We gave an hour and a half class last week in this very large company to their employees who are fascinated by this stuff on what do we do if something happens? Do we run into the hallway? Do we run into the stairwell? Do we hide under our desk? Do we barricade ourselves? Are there safe rooms? So all of these very important questions are now coming out into the open, and we're trying to help answer them. And it's, I'll be honest with you, for a private industry, it's not a huge moneymaker, but it allows us to get into these companies, explain what we do, help them mitigate any risk, and hopefully, God forbid something happens, they now have a way to address what's going on.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you should say that that demand is there. About a year and a half ago, we started to put together a program through WVMI, which is a workplace violence mitigation specialist. It's a 40-hour course that we present online, and it's designed to target upper management, internal security directors, and HR folks. So that when somebody like your company goes in there and actually teaches this class and you leave at the end of the day, you've got somebody else within that works there that has a working knowledge of the plan that you're trying to execute for them, right? So you've got internal cooperation, internal buy in, internal interest, and it doesn't die with you leaving the report on their desk and saying, good luck to you, because ultimately we all know that those things get forgotten. Just like you said, people have a short memory.
Yeah. And when things go wrong, people do not remember. So that's a great idea. And that's the first kind of I've heard of that. And I'm gonna take you up on this, and and I'm not just saying this because I'm on the podcast, we'll offer this service to our companies, because once we leave, that's the truth. We give that hour and a half class, hour-long class. Once we're out the door, you can't call our CPP back. You can't get Mike Ruggiero on the phone and say, hey, yeah, we could do a refresher, but who is the contact, the point person, the building captain? And I even mention that because in New York City, we do have a designated floor captain for these high-rise buildings. And as you can see, we're on the actual 16th floor, but some buildings behind me, you know, they're 40, 50, 60, 70 stories. And if there's an evacuation that has to happen, even pursuant to a fire condition or smoke condition, you want someone to understand, hey, is everyone out of the office? Do we have a head count? Has everyone gone down the stairs? Who was not here today? And that's a very, very important factor. No doubt about it. I love it. Great. That's a great
Yeah,
idea.
thanks, thank you, and we'll talk again offline because I have a company and they're going to be on the show here within the next couple of weeks. That I went and saw a demonstration when you're talking about the bulletproof film. These they're located in Illinois, and these guys really have created a bulletproof film. I mean, I saw it in action. Um, they're stopping a 50 caliber from a couple feet away with a
Yeah.
clear film on a window. I've never seen
That
anything like it in my life.
and that's what we heard. I gotta tell you that another situation that came up is we were asked to talk to numerous tenants of a large building where we do security. We do have an armed security agent in the lobby. Um, and they talked about this bulletproof film, and they were very angry, the chief security officers, security directors of these firms, when they asked me a very simple question. They said, if there's an active shooter on the 30th floor in our building, is your guy in the lobby going to respond? I said, absolutely not. He is there to protect the building. We're contracted to protect the building and the outside perimeter. We're not contracted to protect the tenants. You have to take those proactive steps to put somebody in your space, to get a security assessment, because just think of the liability of our company. So we send the guy to the 30th floor, and there's two active shooters on the 28th floor and the 30th floor, or in the lobby in the 30th floor, and then say, "Hey, you said you'd respond. We're only contracted to do that lobby situation," and they were all very angry that I said, "No, we're not going to do this. We were not contracted. We're contracted by the building to protect their areas." That being said, they did talk about this bulletproof film, which I've never seen, but they claim the same thing that you're saying, that they've seen it in action. And it's about time that these companies take proactive steps to protect their employees. It's usually important. And like you said, once you leave and once we hand the dossier to, the security director, throw it on his desk and say, this is what you should do. And, even if they take up some of our recommendations, there's no training for those employees to follow protocol if something happens. And very, very, well taken point.
Yeah. So we did some training for we do a lot in the manufacturing industry, and it's interesting when you go in and you do these assessments, and I'm sure you encountered this as well. If they've already got something in place that they think is going to work, and then they explain it to you and you're standing there shaking your head. For example, we had the one company that says, well, if we have an active shooter, we have a huge white X in the parking lot, and everybody runs and stands on that X. And I said, so you've put all of the fish in one barrel, and the active shooter knows exactly where, because most of these active shooters, or a lot of them, come from within. I said, you guys, we got to redo all of this. This is not a tornado drill. It's not a fire drill. This is a different animal. So, again, if they don't have anybody that's trained and receptive to take what you give them and move the ball further down the field, then it dies in their on their desk, and we're not doing anybody any good. So, very interesting concepts. What from an individual perspective, and I always like to, as we get towards the end of our recordings here, I always like to ask my guests, from an individual perspective, what can you recommend to these folks? I'm not talking about ABC media, that's a 70-story building in New York City. I'm talking about Jane Smith, who works for ABC, things that she can take for her own personal protection and start to expand upon it, whether it's some training that she can seek out individually, or um, things of that nature, a book that she can get, that she can read, anything like that that you've got that you can let our folks know is a good idea, a good starting.
So I think that it is important that people take ownership of their own safety. And to that point, of course, attend any training that your company will give you. Ask your company, ask the important questions. Have you done an assessment? Have you taken steps to give us active shooter training? Have you pointed, out a captain that could instruct us after everyone leaves and have done the assessment and the training on an ongoing basis? As we all know, there's millions of things out there regarding active shooter um, mitigation on YouTube, on all sorts of different platforms. LinkedIn has a lot of articles. There's no particular book that I have read. However, I have seen many of these videos and what to do in a situation where it's an emergency and you need to take care of yourself. But I think taking ownership of your own safety and insisting that your company do something about it. Get together with the employees and say, hey, we need training. Have you had an assessment if things go wrong? What are we going to do? And I think that that's probably the primary thing, is to start the conversation, initiate some sort of education yourself, and then insist that your employee take the steps to protect you as best they can.
Yeah, yeah, and we tell people all the time, if you go at your employer as a group, not just as an individual, so start some chatter in the lunchroom with some of these folks, and you go to the employer and say, "Hey, look, what are we doing about this? Have you ever had this? Have you ever had that? Now you've actually put the employer into a position where they've got a liability because you've brought it to their attention. And if they dismiss you, we tell them, take note of the fact that it was dismissed, because if it goes sideways here and you have people hurt or killed because of it, in the aftermath, there is going to be lawsuits galore. There's going to be stuff flying all over the place. And if the company acknowledges ahead of time that, yes, this is a concern, but we're not going to do anything about it, right? It increases that liability for them. You might just want to draw that to their attention. The other thing that we're seeing here, a lot of these folks are motivated by OSHA. How is that looking in New York? Because I know how it is on the West Coast. Um, California has just passed some laws that require this kind of training and planning and whatnot, and it is slowly moving its way across country. I expect it's going to hit the Midwest, and I already have good insight that it's coming in, already started in New York. So, are you seeing any of those people calling you saying, "Hey, this is a requirement for us," or we know it's going to be? How can you help us get in front of it?
So we haven't seen that yet out here in New York. And you would imagine a place like New York City with all these huge buildings, and you said you're in Chicago, Dan, that, it's a major concern because you're trapped. Where do you go? If you're
Right.
50 stories up, where do you go? And I'm hoping that they do mandate it at the local government level or at the federal government level, to mandate training, and mandate some sort of assessment of your current security posture. But like you said, it just needs to be a groundswell. So what do we do to get our employers to listen to us, to address the situation, give the basics of what we need to do if something happens. But no, I haven't heard it, and I'm hoping that we do hear it, though. That would be welcome news to our ears.
Yeah, I've got some insight, some information that I will forward to you. I'm working with a very large law firm that deals with this kind of stuff. They have an entire unit that's dedicated strictly to workplace violence cases, primarily in California, but I know that they also have one here in Illinois, and they have an office actually in New York. So I will make those connections for you, and we can keep our thumb on the pulse of this thing together. So.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Mike, thank you very much. It's been great talking to you. I expect that as things proceed and new events arise and new training arises, we will probably jump on another one of these calls at some point and give everybody an update. But it's been great to get a perspective of what's going on in New York and what you're seeing out there, especially considering that you guys have just recently had one of the events of your own at 345 Park. God bless those people that lost during that event. I always like to dedicate these episodes to those that have lost loved ones and family members. It's got to be a horrible. I've never experienced it myself, but
Yeah.
it's got to be a horrible way to get a phone call in the middle of the day that I can only imagine. So thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. For those of you that watch our podcast on a regular basis, make sure that you like and share it. It's important that we get this information out. The content of these episodes can be used by not only companies but individuals to mitigate loss of life and livelihoods in the face of workplace violence. So we're here to save lives, folks. So make sure that you help us try to spread the word. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for your work.
Thank you.